Alrighty guys, so as I promised, I will make a video about the decks that I consider my best matchups, the decks that I love playing against, the decks that I think are very competitive to beat, the decks that make me use my resources, the decks that make me think, the decks that don't make me get mad. These are the decks that I love to play against, and I don't have a problem if my opponent uses these decks, because if they use them, I will have a lot of fun. So, starting off from right to left instead of left to right, because I want to save the best for last, I'm going to start off with windups. Now, last format, I will have to say that windups were probably the second most annoying deck to play except for Inzektus, because windups, you know, that whole hand loop thing, you know, what the hell are you going to do? This format, because they've changed their playstyle, it's a lot funner to play against them. And now I can showcase that my deck can actually beat windups if they don't get their loop off. Because I have Thunder King, I have ID, I have a bunch of trap cards that slow down all of their plays. And at the same time, they spam so much that they're going to force me to use my resources. So basically, they have resources that stop me, and I have resources that stop them. And I think that's what makes a good matchup. A good matchup is when decks both have certain cards that kill each other, and you have to use them more effectively to win. And because I have all of the cards to stop windups, and because they have all the cards to stop me, windups are by far one of the funnest decks to play this format. If it was last format where they can loop me first turn, hell no, I wouldn't even think of putting this deck on here. But, I mean, now that they're slower than they used to be, you know, I have to be more conscious of what they do, because I have to watch out for certain things. I mean, they're not as strong as other decks are, so when they kill a card, I drop ID. Then they have to go into a synchro summon, I kill it with the trap. Maybe I don't have a trap. Windups are fun, and you guys are probably thinking this. I'm crazy for putting this on here, because they're like, windups, no way. I'm telling you guys, I don't mind playing windups this format. So if you challenge me with windups, I'll be happy to play you. So moving on to psychics. At first, I thought that psychics were hard for me to beat, because every time I kill them, they get the search, they get to add. But then I realized this is a really good matchup for me, because psychics are probably one of the most neutral decks to my deck. They don't necessarily have anything that really beats me, and I don't really have anything that necessarily kills their deck. I mean, Thunder King doesn't kill too many cards in their deck, and on top of that, they have a lot of cards that they can get their other psychics back with the whole Esper Girl, Serene Witch. There's a warrior with 1900 attack. I can't remember his name right now, but with all of those cards, they can always get their cards back, which makes it a little harder for me to beat them. But at the same time, they don't have the threatening cards that pop my deck. So I would have to say psychics are probably one of those borderline decks that they force me to beat them using a lot of skill and basically a beatdown strategy. And they don't really we really don't have anything that kills each other. That's basically what separates this deck. I mean, I can't really think of anything. I mean, I planned this video and I really could not think of anything that I can think of that psychics can basically beat me with. So because of that, they have to be neutral. Now, this is a shout out to my good old friend Clayton, aka Duct Tape. He uses this deck all of the time. I play against this deck all the time. As a matter of fact, I built a competitive version of this deck for him. The Hunter Family deck is one of the funnest decks for me to play against. I love playing against it, and he loves playing against my deck, because the thing is that a lot of my cards stop his cards. His deck doesn't like traps. His deck doesn't like Thunder King, even though ironically he plays Thunder King. But not for the searching part, mainly because of the negating part. But at the same time, my deck keeps his deck in check, because his deck is extremely explosive. I don't think there's too many more decks that are more explosive than the Thunder Family deck. And when I mean explosive, I don't mean like windups just spam. I mean this deck can bring out boss monsters like no tomorrow. In 1 second, all he needs is a Violent Prism, all he needs is a Pyhunter and a Mahunder. He's already dropping a strong card on the field like that. It's like in a snap, you know? And because of that, it makes it really hard for a lot of certain players to beat this deck. This deck is really good. I think this is a tier 1.5 deck. People are going to think I'm crazy, but I really think this is a good deck. I just don't think people know how to build it right. If people saw my build, or my friend Duct Tape's build for this deck can top of the YCS. The thing is that this deck is very patient. You don't explode off of the top. The thing is that if you have the right cards, you explode on the moment with this deck. And at that very moment that you explode, your opponent can basically get overrun. You just spam the field with so many monsters. If you get torrential, you use recycling batteries, you use ultimate offerings, you pay on your life points, you just go right back at it. Your opponent has nothing they can do to stop this deck, because this deck can spam boss monsters like a blink. And because of that, it makes it really hard for slower paced decks to keep up with it. And because my deck is extremely anti-meta, this keeps this deck in check, and they keep me in check because they force me to use my resources. Now, going on to Madolches. Madolches, I will have to say, are a good matchup for me. This is another neutral deck. Madolches, believe it or not, they force me to use my resources, but it's kind of hard for me to necessarily wipe them out like other decks, because when I kill them, they go back to the deck. They don't go to the graveyard, and my deck is perfect when it comes to sending cards to the graveyard and sending cards to the remove from play pile. So, because of that, Madolches are always forcing me to use my resources, but I have to use them wisely. Their cards aren't necessarily that strong, so I can play with them on a beat stick level. So I don't have to worry about them dropping a card that's too high, and then I have to definitely use my resources to kill it. So I can have kind of a conventional fight with Madolches, and I really like it. So it's more like we both have weak monsters that fight against each other, and then they don't have boss monsters that are that strong, so I don't have to use my resources excessively. But even though I don't have to use my resources excessively to kill the strong cards, their cards keep going back to the deck, which still makes me use my resources to kill them, but not to kill boss monsters, which makes sense. It just probably doesn't sound right. So basically, that's why I like playing against Madolches. They're a really good matchup for me to play against. Chaos Dragons. Even last format, I will have to say this was one of my favorite matchups to play against. People thought it was broken. Okay, I'm not going to lie to you. Opening up with Future Fusion was crazy. But, I mean, people are always concerned about one card, in my opinion. I mean, Future Fusion isn't always going to happen. It's just the threat of it happening first turn is extremely scary. If you go Future Fusion second turn, it's not as effective as it is first turn. And on top of that, Future Fusion is at 1. Well, it was at 1. So you're not going to draw it all the time. I mean, people don't draw limited cards all the time. People exaggerate. I mean, cards like Dark Hole, Heavy Storm, Monster Reborn, they don't get that much play in a duel. But the thing is that so many people run those cards, they're always being used. They're just being used by different people. So you're going to see the card frequently in decks. You're just not going to see it frequently used in a deck. And that's how I looked at Chaos Dragons last format. I know how to side very well. A lot of my friends, even the best duelists I know, my friend Sean Harris, he comes to me for advice when it comes to siding, because I'm really good at siding against certain decks. And because of that, Chaos Dragons weren't that hard for me to beat. I sided in Soul Release the minute they put out that Future Fusion. I banished all of their cards. I know how to Veiler at the right time. I know how to use Thunder King at the right time. And not to mention, I can get rid of their loops with Light Pulsar and Red Eyes Darkness Metal with, I would say, maybe a Neospatian Grand Mole, maybe a DD Warrior Lady. I knew how to get past their loops, and my deck had the card to do it. So that's one of the reasons why I really like playing against Chaos Dragons. Now it's actually a little easier than it was before, but it's still a pretty good matchup. Now going on to Synchrons. Now, if you were to ask my friend Lewis, or if you were to ask my friend Sean, how I compare with Synchrons, they would probably tell you that I have a very strong matchup against them. They would probably say that this is an easy matchup for me, but I completely disagree. Synchrons force me to use my resources wisely. Just because a deck is a good matchup or an easy matchup, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm not going to win most of the time. I win most of my duels against this deck because I know what to do. But this deck really forces me to use my resources wisely because this deck can spam a lot. It's very similar to Wind-Ups in my opinion. But they're another deck that doesn't have that much popping power. So, like I said, it's forcing me to use a lot of my resources to kill a lot of cards, but at the same time, it's not like I'm killing cards that pop. You see, they don't have too many popping cards. I mean, I think there was Synchron Warrior, like you pop 2 cards for how many tuners were used to make him or something, or how many non-tuners were used to make him. That card is the only real threat to the deck, and I know how to side against this deck. I said in Maxis, the Side Invaders. And their advantage to me is that they can summon really fast, and my advantage to them is that I can kill really fast. And because of that, it really balances out. My problem is if you go into Quasar, I'm in big trouble, because I have to minus a lot to kill Quasar. I don't have a problem killing Quasar. People don't realize that my deck can kill everything. It's designed to kill all monsters. But the problem is that when you're forcing me to use an excessive amount of resources to kill 1 or 2 cards, that's when you get me. Because I use 2 smashings to kill a Quasar, then you bring out Shooting Star Dragon, I summon Mole, bounce it to the hand. That forces me to use my resources, and that's one of the reasons why this deck is really good for me to play against. Now going on to Geargias. This is not like Gadgets where it's like a piece of cake. Once I have Thunder King, then I don't have to worry about anything besides maybe a Machine or Fortress, which isn't that much of a problem because I have other cards to deal with them. Geargias are pretty good. My friend Sean uses this deck. Other people use this deck. I can't say this deck is easy, because in the right hands of a good duelist, this deck can be a real threat. My friend Sean uses this deck really good, and he uses it in a way that he knows how I play using my Apocalypse deck, so he plays against me. So he usually wins most of the time. But for other duelists, I've noticed that it's a fairly weak matchup. But, I mean, if they use their cards effectively, if they spam at the right time, if they get their pluses, and if I don't stop them from getting their pluses, this deck can be a real problem. And like I said, this is another deck, just like the rest of these decks, well, most of these decks. It has a lot of resources. It can spam moderately fast, and it does have some popping power. And because of that, it's a really good matchup. It's like a hybrid. It has the resources, but not too much, and it has a popping factor, but not too much of a popping factor. And that's why this deck is a good matchup. Now, this is the last one I will cover. Dino Rabbits are my favorite matchup to play against, and I will say this with pride and honor, because I love playing against Dino Rabbits more than any other deck. The only Dino Rabbit deck I don't like playing against is my friend Lewis, because he always opens up with first turn Logia and second turn Doko, which almost never happens in any other Dino Rabbit deck. But the casual Dino Rabbit deck is pretty fun to play against. We have all of the cards that stop each other. This is a perfectly balanced deck against mine. There's no way that I can say that they have an advantage or I have an advantage. We have all of the cards that neutralize each other. For example, they have Logia. Logia stops my spells and traps from killing them, and which is a good thing. But I have Stomad Eater, I have DD Warrior Lady, I have Night Assailant, that when Logia attacks my card, I flip it over and kill their card. But they have Doka, so Doka kills my cards when I flip them over. But I have Smash and Ground, and I have a lot of trap cards. So Smash and Ground and my traps and Dark Hole are going to stop the Doka from getting their plays off. You see what I'm saying? You guys are following me. This deck is really, really, really interesting to play against, because my opponent is always constantly thinking, do I go Doka, do I go Logia? I mean, if you're going to be like my friend Lewis and cheat by just going Logia, waiting 5 turns until you get Doka, okay, fine, then you're going to beat me. But in that meantime, I can find ways to kill Logia with other cards. And then when Doka comes out, I'll kill him another way. So, what I'm basically saying here is Dino Rabbits also have a decent amount of resources. They're not extra spammy. So when you use Maxi, you're not going to use it a million times like other decks. And that's one of the reasons why this deck is really, really, really good to play against. They have the resources, they have the they don't really have the popping factor, but they have Doka, which can really hurt my deck at certain points. So it really takes a really smart Dino Rabbit player to beat me when I use my Apocalypse deck. And that's all, guys. Thank you guys for watching. Please rate, comment, and subscribe, and have a great morning.